time is now 7:30. Meeting will be called to order. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law 30A 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Finance Committee being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time through technological means. Members of the public who would like to participate in the meeting via Zoom may do so by clicking this link. Members of the public who would like to listen to this meeting while in progress may also do so via telephone by dialing 1-646-558-8656 and enter meeting ID 827-9486-4981. Then press pound and press pound again at the next voice prompt. Members of the public attending this meeting virtually will be allowed to make comments if they wish to do so during the portion of the hearing designated for public comment by following the steps previously noted, then press *9 on the telephone keypad or use the raise hand function on Zoom. This will notify the meeting host that the caller wishes to speak. In the event that despite our best efforts, we are not able to provide for real-time access, we will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as we are able. And now I'd like to take a roll call. Chairman Doherty is excused. John Dugas.
Present.
Mary Ann Galezzo.
Present.
Michelle Kincaid.
Present.
Andrew Levine.
Present.
Lee Martinson.
Present.
Bernie Nally.
Present.
Kevin Stokes.
Present.
And Teresa Manganelli is present. Good evening, everybody. We'd like to welcome the Wilmington schools here for their budget session. It looks like you brought quite a few people with you. So how is everybody doing tonight?
Very good. Thank you.
Good evening. Yeah, I don't know that I can speak on everyone's behalf, but I think we're doing all right. Thank you for having us.
Okay, so you can feel free to get started whenever you'd like. If you'd like to introduce the folks on the committee that you brought with you and others, that would be fine too.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll start. Thank you, everyone. I'm Glenn Brand, and it's my pleasure to serve as the superintendent of schools here in Wilmington. Tonight, we have a number of members of our senior leadership team here with us, as well as members of our school committee. I'll just quickly introduce members of the senior min team, and then perhaps I could allow the school committee members to introduce themselves. On the screen, we have Christine Elliott, who is here. Christine is our new assistant superintendent for curriculum and staff development. We also have Ken Lord, who is our director of digital technology and digital learning, and our assistant superintendent of administration and finance, Mr. Paul Ruggiero, is here as well. And thank you for our very supportive school committee. They are here. And Jen, do you want to introduce folks, or do you want me to?
Hi, everyone. I am Jen Bryson. I'm the chair of the school committee, and I will just, here's who I see. And so if you could just quickly say hi, MJ Burns.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to see you all.
Jay Samaha.
Good evening, everybody.
And then I see Jesse Fennelly.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for having us.
And Joe Newhouse.
Good evening.
What did I miss?
I don't think Dave's
Not here yet. Okay, then we are good. Thank you for having us.
Well, if I may, I'll get started. We do have a presentation here, and I will hopefully it allows you to see that. And I'll do the slideshow from the beginning. Just to check, does everyone see that all right?
Yep.
Great, okay. Well, thank you again for having us, and it's our pleasure, my pleasure to be here to be able to present to you this evening the fiscal year 22 operating budget for the Wilmington Public Schools as it currently stands right now, the recommended budget. And what I'm really pleased is that we have so many folks here in company, because this is, well, by title, the superintendent's budget. Far from it being my budget alone. It certainly represents a lot of work and great attention to detail by members of our senior leadership team that are here, through the contributions of so many more that aren't, principals, assistant principals, and various other curricular leaders throughout the district. And of course, certainly last but not least, the support of our school committee that's allowed us to bring this budget before you and ultimately before the community tonight. And so what I'd like to be able to do is, if it's all right, I'll make my way through the presentation, and then if there are specific questions on areas, I suppose certainly we can pause, and if you'd like to ask them in a moment, or we could wait until the end as well too. And I'll ask my colleagues who are here tonight as well to be able to speak to perhaps some of your questions, if you have any on areas that they're more closely connected with and can give you perhaps even more information that might be helpful. So, you know, we are obviously navigating the pandemic, as everyone knows, and perhaps you have some questions that we can certainly entertain later. But the reality for us is we are very much still trying to, of course, operate a school system, and doing so notwithstanding the circumstances and the challenges we have before us. And you know, it was a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago, in which we kicked off that school year with a brand new strategic plan and a refreshed, arguably brand new vision and mission for the district. And if this were more normal times, I'm confident that I would be able to share with you in the community words and ideas and broader thoughts that you would have already heard an awful lot about, because it would have been so representative of the work and the initiatives that we were engaged in as a school system. Sadly, a lot of those efforts have been on pause because of the circumstances, but I'm reminded constantly of the fact that we had a whole host of people that represented 50 or 60 stakeholders to the community that helped us in cultivating our vision, mission, and strategic plan, of which I'll talk a little bit more with you in a moment, and the core values, the Wildcat Circle of Values that, well, that logo may not be new. Some of those ideas and those values are in what they came about through that strategic planning process that I had the good fortune to be a part of my very first year here in the district. But back to the budget, because of course this is obviously why we're here this evening, and to provide you with a framework, I guess, if you will, broadly speaking, in terms of what it is that we believe is necessary from a fiscal standpoint and financial resource to help to support our operations. And so as we look ahead to the building of the 22 budget, arguably this remains relatively static for the most part. As I'm sure many of the committee members are aware, we have certain fixed costs that we have to start with. We know what those will be by contract or other, and so we of course have to start to assembling the budget that way. We have a variety of legal mandates as well that when building the budget we are carefully watching and planning for. We will always endeavor to provide, to the extent we can, special education services in district. Sometimes that's not always possible, and that leads to out-of-district placements, as we refer to them as, but certainly that's an important piece to draw attention to. And as well, of course, and also not certainly the least, but making sure that we are carefully tracking our enrollment and appropriately building sections and staffing around those enrollment numbers. There are assumptions that we make in building the budget, and these are just a few of those that highlight, sort of at a 20,000 foot view, if you will, what it is that we are assuming And of course, the fact is that these are assumptions, and so with that, they can change. And as a starting point, what our projected enrollment is for next year for pre-K to 12, what our out-of-district student population is anticipated to be right now, based upon the information we have before us, and then a variety of other things from grants and other revenue sources that help us in starting that framework for the budget building. I do want to just take a moment and pause a little bit on enrollment, and certainly there have this always is a key piece, of course, of building any school department budget. There is no getting away from the fact that our district, and I would argue like probably every single other district, certainly that I'm aware of, has been impacted by the pandemic on enrollment. That is no secret, and it's no secret at the state level and any other level in terms of the number of students who have at least temporarily pursued other schooling outside of the school district. We also know that at least with the information that we have and that we track on a year-to-year basis, that we're anticipating a slight decline in enrollment. But of course, that can change at any time. That can change with a housing development project. That can change with the turnover of housing stock beyond what is normally anticipated. So there's always fluctuations within that. And finally, certainly with regards to enrollment, how we align with the contract, which does speak to specific guidelines for class sizes or student-teacher ratios. So a whole host of numbers on this, and I should have, forgive me for not saying at the outset, we'll certainly share this presentation with you so members have it before you. I won't go through all of these, but this is not just intended to be busy work to throw numbers on a page, but quite frankly, this is what we, and really through Mr. Ruggiero's efforts, who does an amazing job carefully tracking the attendance and monitoring that and those adjustments from year to year. The cohort survival average, which you'll see the top towards the left-hand side, is a term that's not just one from Wilmington, but often when you're talking about enrollment projections, is a term, a strategy, I guess maybe best to describe it, that's used to try and meaningfully predict how many students will be in the school system over time. And for those that may not be familiar with that, that cohort survival method is taking a look at how many students ultimately are retained, if you will, or stay within the system from one grade level to another. And then it becomes a formulaic approach to sort of map that out over all the grade levels and come up with some predictions, some guesstimations in terms of what we think we will have for enrollment over time. So this shows by grade level, starting with pre-K all the way up to grade 12. The special education is the out-of-district placement that we have. It's very fair to say that sprinkled throughout all of the other grades, there are special education students that are included within the mix. Just to return for a moment to the strategic plan, and I don't want to take a lot of time on this, but I do want to point out that thank you to the support of our school committee. What I've recommended is that we do earmark and do dedicate a certain portion, $75,000 of this budget plan, to with an eye to returning to normalcy, and with an eye to returning to the work that we established as part of the plan that reflects the initiatives and priorities that are felt to be important to help move our district forward. I'm happy to certainly take any follow-up questions if members of the committee are interested in, but you can see broadly speaking some of the action steps on the left-hand side. And along with that, some of what we believe would be necessary fiscal resources to help support those action steps coming to be. And themes around diversity and inclusion, you can see here that are fairly dominant. And again, these action steps come from the strategic plan that the school committee approved approximately a year and a half ago. As I said, Miss Elliott is here tonight, and we are so fortunate to have her join our district. She's stepped into obviously a whole host of things that are not as connected in the same way that they normally would for curriculum and instruction. And she's been a huge part of our team as we try and best navigate, the multitude of challenges before us. But with that being said, our work is about teaching and learning, of course. And so this is an effort to try and provide our community with a snapshot of some of the curricular areas at a high level in which some of the resources go to. And obviously we are a people business where the vast majority of our resources going towards supporting people and the staff that we have throughout our district to help make our operations possible. But there are also obviously other expenses, and that includes in the curricular area. And so this is a highlight of some of the various resources, some smaller in number, some larger, that we are planning for, are continuing in some cases related to either the strategic plan or other curricular efforts that have been started and that require fiscal resources to continue. And so from a curriculum standpoint, you can see here at the top a total of just under $350,000 to support those areas. This is just meant to provide a little bit of a glimpse of some of the planning and coordination that goes into some of the curricular programs that we have. Writer's Workshop as an example, or specifically efforts on a particular domain, in this case, social studies. So this is at the elementary level, and it's a planning guide. It's our planning guide that in turn, Ms. Elliott will be working with our school principals and our teachers in terms of either rolling out, continuing to implement, and or refine various aspects of our curriculum. And so this is an overview at the K kindergarten, 1-2 grade level, and a snapshot of the year in which various activities are planned for over time. This continues that glimpse through until 2024 in grades 3 to 5. And really the thought to include this here is to provide you with you and members of the community a little bit of a deeper sense in terms of some of the elements of the planning that we also take a lot of stock in terms of trying to just continue to improve our teaching and learning. Some additional highlights from within the curriculum and staff development budget lines you can see here. Coaching, having third parties come in and help work with and support our teachers around literacy. Summer curriculum work, that's a ripe and important time in any given year for engaging teachers to help move our curricular areas forward, and some of the other things that are what help comprise the fiscal resources in this department. And again, if members of the committee may have any specific questions, I'll certainly welcome Ms. Elliott to help in responding to those. I'll just shift to a different department for a moment, and that's student support services. And student support services is the title that we use in this district here, and it's not that uncommon to be found in other districts. And broadly speaking, what this department includes is that of special education services, behavioral health, and such things as physical therapy, occupational therapy, those other array of services that are outside of the regular classroom. So this is a very important department for us, as it is with any district. And just to acknowledge here that one of the things that we are indeed concerned about is that of the pandemic and what ultimately the impact of these times will be, both more immediate and perhaps longer term. And so working with our leadership within this department, certainly thinking about that, and thinking about that, as I said, both in terms of the shorter term, but also the longer term too, in terms of once we do come out more completely of the pandemic. And so some of the challenges that we're thinking about and preparing for to try and help support our students and our families. There is certainly no question that broadly we refer to it as behavioral health is something that is of growing concern. I think we are hearing this continuously, again, far beyond the walls of or the borders of Wilmington in terms of specifically the impact of COVID and that on our young people. This year, I'll just take a note, we are again going to be participating in the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. And that's a every 2-year survey that specifically is aimed at gathering feedback and insight from our adolescents around their health and well-being. And I think that it would be an understatement to say that we are quite interested in what that data will point to. This data is also a part of a survey that's completed with the other schools actually within the Middlesex League, and that data will be closely watched when that is given in the spring. Shifting gears to information technology, and again, our thanks to Mr. Lord for his work and his leadership. There's an ever-growing number of technological devices that are so essential in helping guide and support our operations, and that's certainly become no more important than this year, as we have, through Ken and his staff's leadership, worked to provide so many of our students with a device. When we were more remote, so many of our staff members with devices. They've just done an amazing job, and our community is so fortunate to have the skill and the expertise to help. But in any given year outside of a pandemic, there are a growing number of elements that, just like our own homes, are exponentially seemingly growing every year from a reliance upon technology. That is absolutely no different in the work that we do in our school system. And we need to obviously support that, from telephones to servers and everything in between. Laptops, of course, has become a cornerstone really for so much of the work of teaching and learning, and that's not just for our students, but also for our teachers. This is an overview of the new, if I have this correct, and I think I do, the replacements that have happened over recent years. And you can see these are the high school, middle school, north, and so on, in terms of the total number of replacements. And Mr. Lord, can you remind me, the replacement cycle, is that 7 years for teacher laptops? Is that correct?
Laptops is more closer to 5 or 6 years, just
Right.
because of the number. We have to split it up a little. Desktops are closer to 7 to 8 years.
Thanks, Ken. And not only are we utilizing laptops throughout our district, but also desktops. These are found in a variety of applications, both for computer labs, for students, workstations for staff. And so, again, somewhat similar to the laptops, an overview of the tracking that goes on behind the scenes with Ken and his team, and the effort through capital to make those replacements to keep us current and making sure that the technology is working appropriately. Chromebook replacements is specifically for students. We use in this district Chromebooks, and so there is a cycle here. We, as I think members hopefully of the committee know, at the middle school and high school level, really are by definition a one-to-one, for the most part, a one-to-one program or application, but that certainly has changed with the pandemic and since the beginning of school, actually going back to when we closed in March, in terms of, in some cases acquiring, in some cases taking, in many more cases, taking Chromebooks that we may have had on a cart in, say, our elementary schools, and disassembling those and making sure that those were brought to students so that they could use them when remotely. So it's been a tremendous challenge in a very different way in these unique circumstances. Projectors are also something that not just the hardware in the sense of desktops and laptops, but certainly the projectors in classrooms. I don't imagine we have a classroom right now that's used for full educational purposes that does not have a projector. And so part of the necessary planning through capital is to replace those periodically. Those burn out, they wear out, they're used constantly. And so this, again, just an insight in terms of the various tracking that the district tries to do to make sure we're staying on top of that. All right, so just a few more slides. If you thank you for your patience as you bear with us here. So here's the budget itself rolled up, right? This is obviously a large and complex budget. There's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of budget lines or account lines within it. But when you peel back the layers, here's what it looks like. And just to point out and just to make sure that people are clear, the FTEs is the acronym we use for full-time equivalent staff. We have a combination of full and half-time staff, and so when combined, that's why we track it carefully that way. So what this slide shows you is the FY21 budget, so the current year that we're in. Sometimes there are necessary adjustments that need to be made from the completion, if you will, or the final passes of the budget previously. Over the summer, that's usually the case. Educational assistance as an example, that may have been the case where specific student needs changed over the summer and we were able to adjust accordingly. A couple of other moving parts there, but you can see the net change there. So the start of the school year as a school district, we started with 487.4 FTE staff. Again, combination of full and part-time staff. We had a minor change of a 0.5 educational assistant, but the recommended budget that is before you and before the town at this point is a total of 487.9 staff FTE. And based upon, again, the information that we have right now, our projections, enrollment and other, we believe that this is an adequate number of staff to support our operations for next school year. Salary changes. This slide reflects an overview of the starting point for fiscal year 21 at $34,403,406. You can see the breakdown here of the various roll-up, I guess, if you will, categories. I'm not sure if Paul exactly uses that term necessarily, but I will in terms of the 20,000-foot view of steps and lanes by contract. So many of our staff, not all, but many of our staff are changing their position on a salary grid from year to year. A reflection of new positions, salary increases, replacements, reductions, retirements, and for some longevity payments. And so you can see what that rolls up to there, just a little bit over $1 million with the FY22 recommended budget with a 2.99% change at just a little bit over 35 million. Non-salary changes, again, understanding well that the vast majority of our resources go towards the support of people. But as mentioned, we have a number of other elements that are necessary to help support our operations. And so this tracks the changes from fiscal year 21 in these non-salary categories, array of things, as you can see here, from textbooks to technology, electricity, special education tuitions. Those are for the out-of-district students that I mentioned earlier. And all of the various ins and outs or adjustments, if you will, for the non-salary changes. And what that rolls up to is a 0.7% change from fiscal year 21, with a combined total in the FY22 recommended budget of just a little bit over $9 million, $9,383,000. So taking those accounts separately and then combining, this slide shows a comparison between fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22, salary on the top line, and again, the respective changes from fiscal year 21 to 22, with that percent change of 2.99. Non-salary, as mentioned here, and you can see those adjustments, if you will, from the current year to what's being planned for next year at 0.7, with the total the total operating budget as part of this budget package for fiscal year 22 at $43,722,036, 2.5% increase. A quick last couple slides of an overview of capital requests and the planning that also goes into those. The vast majority of these are technologically based, not all, but the vast majority, as you can see here. And again, part of the planning. And as I have come to learn in my time here, we are so fortunate to have the support of the town to continue to help support our efforts in this capital needs. It allows us to continue to move forward in technology, enhancing, replacing where we deem it advantageous to us. And so you can see some of these get into the nuances of switches and the infrastructure that's behind the scenes. But like any corporation, that's what we really are. There's a whole lot of moving parts that are necessary to help ensure that our students and our staff can access the technology to support their learning and their teaching. And you can see the outlying years of what's being projected for capital requests. The final thing I just would close to say, in closing, say here, and that is around staffing. It was a year ago in which I was before you in this committee that I was presenting a budget plan that included some additional staffing requests. And thank you to the support again of the town, we were able to realize those. In particular, those were really incorporated into our Office of Student Support Services. And some of you may recall those recommendations. And we were able to bring those positions in line and on board. We also had one in the tech area of technology that after Mr. Lord's arrival a year ago, identifying some things that were advantageous to that department. So I should point out that the FY22 budget does not include recommendations for any new personnel. It certainly is understood that there are fiscal concerns as it relates to the situation that not just Wilmington's facing, but obviously the state and beyond. And so that's certainly understood. But with that said, it certainly, I think, is important for me to point out that enrollment will continue to be something that obviously we will track, and we will necessarily respond or shape our staffing adjustments, whether that's expansion for additional teachers because our enrollment's growing, or going the other way because of adjustments in staffing. But I do think it's just an important opportunity, if I may, to point out that I think that there are additional areas when I think about how to best try and move forward the district that represent areas that I think we should be at a future time thinking critically and carefully about in terms of how we might bolster the services that we provide to the community of Wilmington and obviously our families. These are in no particular order, but in the area of supporting equity and diversity. To continue our work in shoring up additional supports for social emotional learning. There are a number of other areas within a Walker report. This was a third-party report that we had commissioned to take a closer look at our services delivered in the Office of Student Support Services. There's some things there that we still need to circle back to. I think that there's an opportunity for us to strengthen our curricular coordination and leadership down the road, as well as instructional coaches as well too. So again, I only share these with you with a view of thinking about the fact that I think, like all organizations, there are areas where we can grow and improve our services. I think that these represent some of those, but I recognize that now is not the time to be thinking about proposing new positions. Finally, superintendent and district goals. There are two that I just bring focus to specifically that work has begun that may down the road have a budgetary impact. Actively taking a look at the middle school program or starting that process, as well as the high school program. And depending on what comes out of this work, possibilities, opportunities for adjustments or changes that that may be staff neutral, or perhaps they're not in terms of what comes out of some of the recommendations. But I just thought that I would, and these are goals that I've shared previously with the school committee, and they've approved. So I know that that's a lot of information, but with that, my team and I would be happy to take any questions if members of the committee have. And I can go back to some of the slides if you'd like as well too.
Well, I think I'll start off then. As you know, for the last couple of years, now this is my third year, bringing up the question of the declining enrollment. And I'm happy to see that you addressed it in your budget this year with plans to address it more formally next year. Certainly during this current pandemic, that's a task that would be quickly put aside to deal with so many other urgent matters. But I do just want to make a point that it seems to me when I'm looking at the enrollment numbers that we're always starting at the current year and then looking ahead. And I go back 5 years or so, and I look at the swing and what has been going on every year in this town. And it looks like in a 15-year period, the high school will lose 285 kids by the time we hit 2026. So 285 children, that's about 14 classrooms based upon 20 children in a classroom to a teacher. Similar to that, in the middle school during the same time frame, it would be a loss of 238 students, which would equate to 9 classrooms based on 25 students in a class. Overall, throughout the entire system, it would be a 20% decline or 777 children during that time period. So rather than looking at the current year and looking ahead at the next 5 years, I think we need to make an effort to look back, see where we were stable, and then look at where we started to decline, because there's already been an impact on classroom sizes. There's already been an impact in the schools based on these enrollments or disenrollments. So I don't want to lose sight of that fact. We're not just losing 20 kids a year. We've already lost a lot of kids. And with that in mind, I'm very concerned with the size of classrooms in the high school. We have to be able to represent this budget to the community, and we have to be sure that when we're proposing a budget of this size, that we're getting the most value for taxpayer dollars. And I would like to once again request the average classroom size for last year, this year being a lost year, by subject matter for the high school. And I would like to know when that would be available. The next issue the next area that I'm concerned with is the Munis software that, as you know, town meeting approved for the town to purchase this software to be used for both the town and the school needs. We had a discussion with Paul Ruggiero during our IT budget review for the town, and he explained some of the issues that he's dealing with that are making it very difficult for the schools to comply with the deadlines that the town is looking at. Given that we cannot move forward without the schools, I just want to point out that every year that we go without utilizing the software is $200,000 in fees that we have to pay out of taxpayer money. We're now probably on our $800,000 payment, and we do not have use of the software. So this has become a very important issue during this budget season. And I would just like to know, what steps do you think can be taken at the school department to ensure that we can make a dedicated effort to achieve these goals and to work with the town? And, we discussed with the town possibly bringing in consultants so that they can come in and they can do all the setup so that the schools don't have to do that. There's money allocated for that. We're strongly advocating that on the town side as well, because we need to get this project done. So I wanted to bring that to your attention.
I'm happy to respond. I don't know if Paul wants to jump in. I'll comment on both. First, to the enrollment, specifically at the secondary level. There is no question in my mind that we do need as a district to take a close look at our secondary enrollment. From what I've been able to tell, and this is my third year in the district, as you may know, it does not seem to me that we have taken a closer look specifically at the alignment of enrollment and that of our secondary level course or programmatic offerings. It's something we need to do. We have a natural, a more naturalized ability and need to do that at the elementary level, because there are very specific class size guidelines in which the scheduling, the structural organization of the pre-K to 5 level is far different and far less complex than the secondary level. And so that's much easier to shape our staffing around. And in fact, notwithstanding what you mentioned a moment ago in terms of the fluctuations in enrollment from year to year, if you were to take a look, or anyone were to take a look at our enrollment across the pre-K to 5 level, you'll see across town, no matter which side of town you are, somewhat by luck and happenstance, it works out, but it works out in the way that those class sizes, for the most part, are very equalized. The secondary level is very different. And I think that it's important to acknowledge, and that's part of the goal that one of the two goals that I mentioned a moment ago, that this aspect is at the heart of those as well too. What is it that we want from a programmatic experience at the Wilmington High School? And I'm going to guess that there is, on the one hand, many of families and students who are very, very happy and content with the array of course offerings that we have at the school. But what we need to take a look at is, can we sustain those? Should we sustain those? Or what other adjustments can we make that may necessarily lead to either larger class sizes and or the reduction in programming? I mean, that is the reality that any district would and should have to carefully track and monitor. From what I've been able to learn, that's something that we haven't necessarily closely done in Wilmington over time, but it's something that we do need to do. There is no question we are losing students from 8th grade to 9th grade. There are, from the data that we have, a majority of the students who are leaving, going from 8th to 9th grade, are going to other public educational school experiences. Often, not always, but often some of the nearby technical schools. We are losing a large number for whatever reasons, and for probably there's a host of them. That's very different from community to community. That I can absolutely unequivocally tell you. But we are losing. We know that. I know that we're losing students. So we do need to be mindful of that, and we do need to track that. And we are going to need to wrestle with that as a community in terms of back to, what are the array of course offerings we want, and where do we best land and make these adjustments. That's not a quick fix, but it's something that I'm committed to looking at. The second item, and I'm sorry, I didn't say, we can certainly get you the class lists for the high school. To be fair, this year is not last year. right? It is very different, and because we have also the reality of students who are learning remotely, there's a very different look to the landscape this year, but nevertheless, it's something we can provide. In terms of Munis and the Munis operating system, I can certainly tell you, and this is from a little bit of afar, although I'm right next door to Mr. Ruggiero, but I know that he and his team were working as hard as they could pre-pandemic in support of and in concert with the town to work on putting in place, I suppose you'd call it the foundation for Munis. I know that I don't know, and I'll certainly let Paul to speak to this if he wishes, all of the nuances of this, but I do know what Munis is. I do know the value of aligning the town and the schools. And just to be clear, there's no question in my mind that makes total sense. The unfortunate reality, though, on a practical level, is that as this is ramping up, so too has one of the most challenging times for everybody, including our industry. And that's not meant to serve as an excuse, but certainly a reality of, as a central office, and I'm sure the same holds true, I would guess, but I don't know for the town. Stretched thin right now doesn't even come close to acknowledging the incredibly challenging and difficult times that anything outside of the norm is right now for everyone here. And so we will continue to absolutely work, and I do believe we have a follow-up meeting with folks to talk more about how we can support the continual steps forward from Munis. And I just want to make that point. Paul, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, and thank you. And the point I made back I don't know, a week or so ago when I was part of the IT presentation to you from the town. It's a capacity issue, and to be honest with you right now, and we have a lot going on. I'm probably going to lose a couple of staff members over the summer, which is not going to help. But we are going to meet with the town, as I think was recommended during that meeting, within the next week or so, just to talk about what can we do to get it back on track or to move it forward. So we're committed to do that. And that meeting is within a week or so. And then I think they were going to report back to the Finance Committee at some point. So we're cognizant of that project. It's, but there's a reality piece, and I'm being honest with you. We'll do the best we can do, and hopefully out of that meetings, we come up with a plan to move forward.
Well, we certainly can appreciate the difficulties that you will have if you do lose the staff that you mentioned. And we're aware of that, and we're aware of the pandemic. And that's why I think when the concept of utilizing some of the consultant money that is a part of the package that we purchased, we have used very, very little of that. And maybe this is a good time to use that to get people in to set up the structure or the foundation of the software and your specific needs, so that you can, when it comes time to fine tune it, you won't have to go through all of that. That's something that, was brought up to the town side as well. It seems like a good use of those funds to get somebody in to do the more difficult part of it. The training is, hopefully not as difficult once it's all set up. But getting it all set up, I'm assuming, is a big job. So just want to make sure that you know that those funds are there from what we've been told.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I do, Mary Ann Galezo. Maybe Paul could answer this. Athletic budget. There's not much left in there. How do you plan on funding that for the rest of the year? I know receipts and fundraising are non-existent at this point. And I know we pay out the administrative staff out of that portion of the salaries.
Yes, there's a a portion of salaries paid out of that. We do have money in the local budget. There are some savings as well, as you can imagine, in transportation, officials, and different things. But we're monitoring it very closely. And, you know, the goal is we have a summer sport camp program. It did not run last summer,
Right.
but our intention is to run it this summer
Okay.
to help offset some of those costs. But we are managing and watching it very closely, the athletic budget. There's costs that aren't occurring as well, naturally, because of the pandemic. So believe me, I'm watching it very closely.
Follow up to that question, with school maybe restarting in person, where do you stand as far as funding goes for trying to open up the schools, i.e. more furniture? Has this been ordered? Where are you at this point for funding on those items?
So we are, and Glenn, you can jump in. We are in the process of looking at that, bringing students back in person. We have bought a lot of personal protective equipment and so forth. We're trying to get an idea of how much, if we were to bring students in person, do we need to purchase additional equipment, desks, face shields, and so forth. So we've started to look at that in some quantities. We don't have the numbers yet that we may need, but we have started to talk to some vendors on that. We do have some grant funding available to cover most of that, I would say. Well, I should say, it depends on what we may need. But we're looking at that as well. And then looking at some other options of, bringing kids in. There might be some little different things that we can do. Is the possibility, and I'll mention, Glenn had mentioned to us that where he lives, the community, having the kids bring in towels. So they're eating their lunch in the gym floor, sitting on a towel. I'm not saying we're going to do that, but there's other things we can look at and think about in case, we need to order X amount of desks and we can't get them in time. So we're looking at all those things. So the superintendent has a process going on right now with all the schools and the principals and in their COVID building-based teams to look at how can we do that to open the schools back up to the kids.
So Kincaid, I have a question. Is the distancing still going to be 6 feet apart, or have you thought of narrowing that down a bit?
So it is one of the key questions, right, that looms out there. So a couple of things on the distancing. It seems quite clear that although the CDC is at least currently sticking with 6 feet distance when students and or staff are wearing masks, the Department of Education in Massachusetts anyway has recently, I won't say revised, but they've gone back to supporting the 3 foot distance. And you hear the 3 foot to 6 foot distance. So we are planning for and assessing somewhere in between. We realize that the greater the distance we can be, the greater chances that we'll be able to keep everyone safe and continue this place that we are right now in terms of transmission. But the 3 feet with masks will be the minimum distance. What we are waiting for, though, is whether or not there's any revision to the guidance that the Department of Education last put out, which has not changed since the summer, or it's probably late spring. And that is that when a student is maskless, such as at lunch, the distance between students is 6 feet, has to be. And as perhaps some of you have heard me talk about before, and certainly our reopening, and this is again not just Wilmington, this is the lunch issue that you may hear others talk about. 6 feet distance between students in a lunchroom is a lot of real estate. And in all of our cafeterias, if we have all students in, like as in normal times, there is not a single cafeteria that we have in any of our 8 buildings that could accommodate all the students that they normally do in normal times. And so what that leads to is having to come up with a different plan. That's why some districts are not feeding lunch to students. That's why some districts might explore in nice weather outdoor tents. That's why some districts have resorted to taking over the gymnasiums as whole as a secondary cafeteria. So those are all things that we are actively considering and reviewing, quite honestly, right now, because we anticipate that there will not be a change in the 6-foot distance when students are eating lunch.
Thank you.
Sure.
John Dugas. I don't have this question is, I think, probably more, bigger picture about the school districts here, but just looking at some of the, salary line items here, looks like some of the bigger increases, when I look at sort of the makeup of like the music teachers or something, it seems they all have replacements as part of that. Is this pointing to potentially our current makeup of teachers being underpaid compared to the market? And is this going to be something that sort of we see every time there's turnovers, that we're going to have to see a 10% increase per teacher, or is this maybe an aberration this year due to the pandemic?
If I may, a lot of the replacement line is a combination of someone may have retired and being replaced by someone, or and we had quite a few of those at the end of last fiscal year. So there's replacements of who left, if you will, and then we always naturally, as every school district, you have people that resign, either throughout the school year or really over the summer and so forth. But we did have a large number of retirees effective June 30th of 2021. 21? Yeah.
So just as a sort of
20,
follow-up,
20, sorry.
just a sort of follow-up, my thought would be that if someone's sort of retirement age, that we're usually probably stepping down into a lower pay scale for a replacement, because there'd be less tenure. But it just seems that with some of the line items, that might not be the case. I just don't want, and again, there might not be a necessary answer, but just wonder if that points to something larger.
Yeah, I would say that this year we haven't had anything more than just the normal attrition of the people leaving. Sometimes in the budgeting process, what can also happen is if you're anticipating someone retiring, you might reduce the salary a little bit to what you think you're going to, bring someone in, and lo and behold, you bring someone in at a higher rate than that. So that contributes as well. There's a little bit of, there's, from a budgeting perspective, that's kind of some of the things you do.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul.
Yep.
Kevin Stokes, I have a question around technology, and what's the current relationship between the town and school relative to managing technology spend and sort of collaboration?
Sure, you want me to answer that, Dr. Brand?
Sure, thank you.
Sure. So John O'Neill and I collaborate very closely on anything we can. We do quite a bit of collaborative planning on cybersecurity planning. So we both we worked as a team this year to work on the cybersecurity plans for the district and the town, and how would we react, because we do share a common network. Outside of that, we can't really collaborate on purchases. Our school purchases, we get different discount rates than the town does. We're both staffed to maintain our own networks, but we do use each other as sounding boards. And, last year when we brought in a backup solution, we were looking at one before they were. So we brought a vendor in, they looked at the same vendor at the same time, the same types. We both ended up purchasing the same systems because of that kind of collaboration. So it's more on a colleague level than anything else.
There are opportunities, I guess, I don't know what the current state of your phone system and, some network connectivity, et cetera. I don't know how far along you've gotten in those conversations, but there's, there would seem to be some opportunity to look at infrastructure, and perhaps some different ways that you might be able to leverage savings from each other.
Not as many as you'd think. So the one area that we are looking at is the phone system you're talking about. So our phone system is on the capital plan, and I don't have it in front of me right now. I think it's a couple years out, but the town is looking at one now. So we're looking to collaborate on that type of a system. The phone system itself could be one specific system where we can collaborate, particularly if if there ever becomes a unified town and school admin building, because that would become a more natural progression to that, but even for the whole district. But things like infrastructure, it is hard to share. We do share the same fiber optic network. We share the core switches at the town are very similar. So we're all in the same types of things like that. But things like bandwidth and internet bandwidth, we can't share because ours qualifies for E-rate reimbursement, and it can only qualify for that reimbursement if it's only used for the school. So we can't share on those kinds of things. But we do what we can to share things.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Mary Ann Galezzo, Paul, this might be a question for you. Chapter 70 funds, do you have an estimate of what we might have lost with the down enrollment?
So I did send you something on that, I believe, but the Chapter 70 actually, even though enrollment's down, there's a hold harmless provision, if you will. So our Chapter 70 right now, preliminarily, is going to increase. I think it was maybe $85,000 over FY20 in FY22 over FY21 Chapter 70 amounts, and that's I think like $30 a student type calculation. So they, districts are held harmless, meaning you get the same amount year to year, and there's this $30 this year anyway. It ranges from 20 to 30 per student increase. So I think it was, I don't have it's around 80,000 or so higher than FY.
Yeah, that's the number I came up with.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
The students that left this year and enrolled in other schools, our hope obviously is that they will return in the fall. Is there any way that, or how did you keep in touch with any of them? And how many do you anticipate may be gone for good?
So we do have, yeah, that's a great question. And Paul, feel free to jump in if I miss anything, but we do keep them in our database, students that leave. So we know, for example, there's really a couple of things that have happened, again, not just for Wilmington, but from the data that I've seen from the vast majority of districts. There's been an uptick in students that have pursued or been withdrawn for homeschooling. So our numbers in that area, if you will, went up 3- or 4-fold. There's been students who have withdrawn to attend private schools. So we do track and keep their whereabouts, unless, of course, let's say they've moved out of state or something, or to a totally new town. But that outreach, to your point or to your question around making some assumptions that they will return, it is actually something that we intend to do in terms of reaching out and trying to get a better sense. We can't necessarily get an outright commitment, if you will, if they're, for example, enrolled in a private school, or, for example, if they are in a homeschool setting, they're going to complete the year. But we can still get, and it would be in our best interest to get, as good of an idea as we can, so we can plan accordingly. And so we haven't done that outreach yet, but I anticipate doing that in the next short period of time here, as in like the next couple of weeks. And we hope that, families will have a sense of where they're at, so they can let us know reasonably in terms of what that looks like. We want to try and include them, for example, in class placements, right? If there's a 3rd or 4th grade child, for example, the class placement process will start in the spring. It's not to say it can't happen over the summer, but it would be great to know as soon as we can.
How many students do you think roughly we lost to either homeschooling or private school?
If I could,
Thank you.
so just looking at rough numbers, looks like we have about almost 56 more students are being homeschooled this year than were homeschooled last year. So that's a pretty big number. Private schools up about around 50 students that are in private schools more this year than last year. And we lost some additional students to the tech as well. Shawshene Tech, that's about 36 more students are at the tech this year than were there last year. So, we're hoping in that most of the, if not all of the homeschool kids will come back. And we're hoping many of the private school kids will as well. Yeah, that's what the superintendent had alluded to, and with the monitor, and and if they don't, well, we'll have to deal with that in the next budget cycle, obviously.
It would be very interesting to find out of those students who went to private school who were not on that track prior to the pandemic. If they decide to stay in their new school, what the reasoning is for it. What did they find in that school that they were not in Wilmington High School?
If I can, in just another point of reference, throughout the state, the superintendent alluded to it earlier, but enrollment's down almost 31,000 students statewide from a foundation enrollment standpoint. There's a lot of iterations in there, but it's almost 30,500, I think, the last time I had seen something. So as we mentioned, it's not just us, it's just throughout the state, and it's a myriad of reasons. It's, homeschooling, it's private schools, it's, and I don't know if private schools, part of the rationale there is they were in person almost from the beginning. Who knows if that's the case, but that's a lot of students down. And it is I think all districts in the state are very concerned with those numbers. And the belief and the feeling is a percentage of those kids are going to come back. What percentage,
Okay, thank you.
Mary Ann Galezzo, on our meeting with the rec department a couple weeks ago, they had indicated that the schools couldn't be utilized because of the pandemic. Is there a plan now going forward with the spring and summer coming, and with you guys trying to reopen to in-person learning full-time? Any sort of plan at this point to try to get the rec center in there, do some classes on a evening and on Saturdays?
We actually have a follow-up meeting planned for tomorrow to talk about that. But I would say, broadly speaking, I could see it as a possibility. The reason for hesitating or delaying, quite honestly, is rooted in a number of factors. But what prevails over all of them is the time that we're still in, right? And the uncertainty as it relates to where we're going, and I think we've talked to previously about, the reality, for example, in a lot of our gymnasiums throughout the district, we have furniture that's been removed from classrooms. It had to be removed to allow us to set up classrooms at 6 feet distance. If we are talking about the return of all students in person, even if to go to 3 feet, I am extremely confident that we are going to have quite a bit more furniture from some of our buildings, because a lot in our older buildings too, where those classrooms are smaller, there's just not the real estate to keep all of the furniture. So we're right now in a bit of a state of flux, and to commit to to fully opening the buildings to other programs, Parks and Rec or other, right now, just in my opinion, for a host of reasons, seems premature to be able to say we can do it or support it. You know, I was talking earlier about the lunchroom and the possibility, depending on which direction we go, that we may need to set up tables, chairs, or desks in our gymnasiums to accommodate lunches. My understanding is that in some of the buildings, or all that the Parks and Rec are in, they may be setting up there, or otherwise, I'm sorry, using that space. That could be a real, an issue to contend with. Not something that may not be possible, but just right now, as we're still sorting out exactly what it looks like for us. So the degree that we can work through these details, figure out exactly the impact on our school facilities, will then take us to that place of being able to say, yeah, this is something we think we can do. Mr. Hooper will be a part of the conversation too, as well, of course, from the facilities and maintenance standpoint. And if it's something we can do, it would be great to do that. We're not operating our CARES program in April. Just as it's not Parks and Rec per se, but just I know that many know about that program. We just thought it was something we couldn't put stakes in the ground for, to plan for, not knowing what April would look like from the standpoint of COVID cases and such. But we have started to, and it'll be in the school committee packet next week, an update about the CARES program, that we are, you know, full speed ahead in terms of planning for the summer, and the athletic camps as well too. We're hopeful that we'll be able to launch those programs, and so we'll look to certainly collaborate with Parks and Rec to the greatest extent we can, to allow them to offer their programs and services to the community.
Thank you. And with that said, since you're going to do CARES, your programs over the summer, I guess if you can incorporate into that plan the Tiny Tots program, because they use the schools also, and the same dynamic, they need to plan that far out in advance and get enrollment going also. So I think we need to come up with a plan sooner rather than later at this point, just because, again, with everything else, we just seem to be running out of time.
Bernie, Nally, question. When you finally, presuming you finally get to face students in teachers in the classes, I have a feeling that everybody has missed an awful lot of education this year. I consider it a lost year. But is there any way that you could plan to either extend the school days or cancel any vacation? I don't know if there's any left now, or what can be done to give these kids a little bit more education. By the time they're finally going to get back to school, there's 2 months left. As far as I know, the seniors usually get out at the end of May. If that's still going to be the way you handle things, or have you got that far yet?
In terms of the question around holidays, for example, or extending the school year, that's not something. Neither of those that we've specifically we've talked about. There are contractual aspects that certainly come into play as we think about the school year calendar. We have with the committee, we certainly have begun a conversation around next school year related to the topic, and trying to be mindful of such things as the normal early release days that we might try and sprinkle throughout the school year to support professional development or professional learning. Taking another look at that, there was a suggestion about the possibility of extending the school year. The school committee has it within their purview, if you will, to extend beyond 180 days for students. That they are able to do. It is something that has to be formalized through agreement with the association, the local association, which is pretty commonplace from my experience in any district. Extending the school year has a financial component to it, though. It is Each additional day is approximately, Paul, I think 150,000, is that right, total?
Yeah, ballpark, 150, 160,000.
So it's something that obviously has a real cost to it, but the point is well taken. And you know, the seniors will go a little bit longer. I hope I'm not springing this before Ms. Peters has announced that, but they will go a little bit more into June. There is, I don't know if she's finalized what that date looks like, but they'll go a little bit longer, closer to the end of the school year than normal. But I think it's still 12 days ahead of the, I think it's still 12 days ahead of the last day of school. So there are a myriad of things to think about, and I know that people are concerned about two things: social emotional well-being of students, and also the question of academics. And I think that that varies, quite honestly, across the board, across the age levels. You know, you know, with the hybrid model that we've been offering, we've had a large contingent of students who have been fully remote since the beginning of the year. And the rest of our students who have been the hybrid model, which right now for us, as some of you no doubt know, is 2 full days a week, now with additional synchronous instruction happening on the other days as well too. But we do need to get students back into school, and we're looking to try and do that as quickly as we can.
Thank you.
Dr. Brand, have you seen an uptick in the emotional part with the kids at this point?
Yes. In short, yes, that there is indeed, in conversations that I've had with our leadership of the Office of Student Support Services, who have been sharing with me, you know, they're in contact with, whether it be guidance counselors or psychologists and such spread out throughout the buildings, that they're definitely, there is an uptick in cases in students that are rising up that have the manifestation of issues. So I wouldn't be being truthful if I didn't say that there's a concern that's certainly out there, and that I suppose sadly shouldn't be a surprise. It's what we are hearing a lot about, right? Whether you're an educator or not, in terms of the impact that this situation is having on maybe not all, but many students of many different ages too, right? As they try and contend with this. But there is concern about this. And we are talking about what we can do to, I won't say brace, because that sounds like a responsive measure, but certainly shore up or expand our support that we may be able to tap into. And we are actually, discussions have begun on that, trying to think holistically. You know, idealistically, we'd have 4 times as many staff in these areas. We don't. So how do we think about leveraging what we do have? And can we, even on a temporary basis, bring on staff to help support our students? I won't say when they're back, because they're already in us, but when they come back full time in between now and the end of the year and over the summer, and what does that look like? So we're concerned about it.
This is Kevin Stokes. Can I go back to Mary Ann's question from a few minutes ago? Just along that thread, Dr. Brand, you know, we were talking about the rec programs, and, you know, and if you start to combine them with some of the social emotional concerns you're seeing with the children's, with isolation and things, don't you think there should be a little bit more urgency to try to look at some of the programs like rec to figure out how to get kids being kids again, while a lot of the world is starting to come back to normal, you know, to the best we can? If we're debating about where to put furniture, could we find a place to put furniture and get kids, you know, using schools to do whatever they can to start being social again? Is there any opportunity for that?
Yeah, it's a great point. And again, I just want to be clear. I think that to what degree that we can facilitate that, I certainly would be more than on board with that. And I know that furniture, you know, and it's a good description. Is it furniture, or is it Parks and Rec? And I think it is a little more complicated than that. And you know, to be fair, but I also, you know, my conversation originally with Mr. Hall as town manager is, at this very juncture, I just don't know that we can, outright open up buildings as if we are in normalcy, because we're not, and because there are some real impact in some of the different buildings. But as I don't know how far out the Parks and Rec program has to program or schedule, their programs or can make those adjustments. But my hope is as we can, and this is going to be in fairly short order, right? We will know within the next, week, 2 weeks, what this needs to look like on a building by building basis. And then around that, how can we forecast the ability for us to open up either other spaces in the buildings for Parks and Rec, or maybe there's other programs as well too. So to the extent that we can make something happen, certainly would be wonderful. And I hear your point. If that's providing access for kids for some degree of normalcy, the sooner the better, for sure.
And if it's a matter of storage, I'm sure we can find the money to like rent out pods or anything like that. I mean, if that's the biggest hurdle that we need to get over, we can definitely work through that.
Yeah, and that certainly could be a solution, and it's it's what as was asked some of the questions earlier, what additional furniture, what might we need to set up,
Right.
And that's also a possibility that I'll know this time next week, as principals are really sifting through this right now. But might there need to be spaces that otherwise aren't used for classrooms currently or traditionally that may need to be converted to classrooms? And there could be. We have, for example, at the high school level, some really large performing arts classes. Even at 3 feet distance, they're not going to be able to fit in the band room. So what does that look like? They need to go somewhere. So those things, as those dominoes fall into place, we'll have that better sense of. And storage units and pods, if that's a solution, that's something we will certainly pursue. And hopefully we can get our hands on them. So.
Yeah. How about special ed services? Are you tackling that pretty well in this difficult time? As far as getting all the services delivered, or how are we with special ed at this point?
Yes, thank you. Good question. So, one thing that I'm pleased to be able to say is that a couple of things. From the outset, even though as a school system, we've had obviously some starts and stops with COVID numbers, fully remote and hybrid. Since the very beginning of the school year, we were able to provide, with the goodwill and support of our educators and support staff, in-person programming for our high needs students since the very beginning of the year, and that's been consistent despite some of the challenges that some of our schools have had and so on. That has been consistent, and those are a subset of special education, our special education population that have some greater needs. In terms of service delivery, the refinement of how to deliver those back in the spring, whether it be specific services remotely, where that's been necessary, that's continued. Our staffing, for the most part, in special ed has been stable. So on that front, from all accounts and the information I have, we are where we need to be. The concern, though, will be, new calls for evaluations, new calls for that could become quite concerning and could, as I'm sure will probably be the case for many school systems, is completing the evaluations of prospective students and figuring that out. So that's a concern, but I'm sure that if I could talk to 6 of my colleagues in districts that touch Wilmington or however many towns, I'm sure they would say the same thing in terms of a concern. But to this point in time, we've been able to, based upon what I'm aware of, been able to meet what we need to from a service provision standpoint.
Other questions? I think we're done. I would like to say that I have a teacher in the family, and I was just speaking with her today, and I said, you know, this is the absolute worst year to be in education. You have our great sympathy, and for all that you've gone through. It's something that, how do you even write that book as you're living it? So unfortunately, we also have a job to do. So, you know, we are continuing with our job and you know, looking at you to, you know, congratulate you for where you've gotten to, and hope that by this time next year, we can all say, great, we've gotten a lot accomplished in this second year of the pandemic. So best of luck to all of you. And thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good night. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good night. Okay, so do we have any calls from the public, Andrew?
We do not.
You do not, okay. What would I do if you ever said yes?
It'd be really tough after everyone hung up.
Okay, does anybody have any questions or comments? We will be meeting next Thursday to discuss the school proposal to the state. As we were corrected by Jeff Hull last week, the Board of Selectmen will not be meeting with the school committee on Monday, but please tune in to the school committee on Wednesday. See if they work through their process, as I do not believe they have decided upon a plan to present to the state or in turn to us on Thursday. And again, you all have copies of the facilities master plan. And if you, it's a great read, but if you just want to focus on the schools, it's very simple to get through it, and it provides you a great amount of information. So if there are no questions or comments, then
We don't have a meeting on Tuesday?
no.
We're done.
No, we have, normally we would be done tonight. So we do have a special meeting on Thursday, the 11th, with the Wilmington school system to discuss their proposal that is going to be going into the state regarding school buildings.
Oh.
Okay, so if there is nothing else, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Teresa, can I ask you a question? This is Andy. I'm sorry to interrupt. Are we gonna get a new invite, or is that Zoom that was initially scheduled? Is that still valid for the Thursday meeting?
I believe we got one.
Okay, all right.
I can double check, but I believe we got a new one for the 11th. Because originally they were planning on being here tonight, like going from the meeting we just came out of and going into another one to discuss the schools. So now that piece is being broken out, and we'll deal with that next week. And I'm pretty sure I saw an invitation on it. I will double check and let you know.
Thank you. I'll check too. Thank you.
Okay.
And real quick, I think I remember Jeff saying this last week. Was there a portion of the selectmen's meeting on Monday that was going to be dedicated to the senior center that we were supposed to tune into as well?
Yeah.
The senior side?
Yeah, he said something about the senior center was gonna be, that meeting was gonna be at 6 o'clock on Monday night.
Okay, yeah, that's a different, that's on the, no, that's not this Monday, that's on the 15th. That's the committee that is working on the senior center new senior center committee. So the finance committee is not a part of that. I'm actually your representative on that committee.
Jonathan just popped on, Teresa. I think he wants to talk.
I have nothing to add more than what Teresa added. So just to clarify, but yeah. So you can skip our meeting if you want to, John.
Well, I wasn't
Just
implying
want to
that.
make sure I'm there for the relevant stuff.
So, Jonathan, I'm glad you're here. So are you going to have a meeting? So you're having a meeting on the 15th as well as?
Correct. Yeah. So our meeting with the school department on really just trying to get around some sort of general principles so that we can send something to the MSBA that shows that there is some broad consensus amongst very general principles for what we would want to be doing with the schools. So I'm not anticipating that what you folks are going to be presented with and later what we'll be presented with are going to be very specific. You're not going to be looking at blueprints. You're not going to be looking at things like that, but more, do you want an elementary school with 1,500 kids in town? Or do you want to have elementary school kids that are having 2 transitions before they get to middle school? So that kind of stuff, very view from 30,000 feet type of stuff. But yeah, the Board of Selectmen will be going after the school committee on the 10th, you folks on the 11th, and then us on the 15th.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that.
Teresa, going forward, is there any way maybe we can do a meeting once a month, just quick, or some sort of quick update on the Munis program and how well it's going?
I have no problem with that. I think that once we hear from Jeff, get the initial update and find out what their process is going to be. We don't want to be holding a meeting if nothing is going on.
Right, maybe we could set milestones for them.
Yeah,
something.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll check in 6 weeks and,
right.
You know, if things are moving along, then maybe we can make it 8 weeks or whatever. Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. An excellent idea.
Is their first thing, sorry, this is Andy, is their first thing to come back with what are the options first and then figure out, okay, so here are sort of the pros and cons of each, and then go into the timeline? Is that sort of the steps that they need to take?
On Munis?
Yeah, on Munis, right.
I'm truthfully, I'm not sure. We haven't really even had Munis in our vocabulary for a while.
Okay.
It came kind of out of nowhere that it had floundered so much, which is what's caused a lot of anxiety on the Finance Committee. So I think they all understand that they need to really draft a plan and figure out how to do it. And I'm sure that everybody on the Finance Committee would be supportive of that if they needed money for consultants and so on.
There really aren't any pros and cons, because either way, it doesn't make sense for them to throw away what they've already got started. They've got the biggest piece of it started, and that's the base of the Chatfield is the base of your program, and they've got that done. So any system that you're gonna go to, you're gonna have to do the same thing. So why would we ever start over again? And there aren't that many actual programs out there for focused on the government sector. So, you know, Munis seems to be the one that they're all, you know, if you go to any town around here, if you're gonna be moving, that's where they're moving.
Michelle and Kevin, you probably can answer this question. If you get the chart of accounts done, how far are you into the process at that point?
I think that, for me, that was the hardest part as far as understanding how you want to break out your expenses. The school has a little bit more work to do because they have to report even more detail when they do the end of the year report. But usually that can be broken down, you know, through their chart.
I'm not too sure if the school has the chart of accounts entered yet.
Well, no, the school needs to follow. I mean, they can't have their own. It's all pretty much, it's a standard chart. They may have a few more line items that they need to budget for, but the chart is the same throughout the system.
And everything triggers off of that. So if, to answer your question, Marianne, if you've got that, you're well on the way.
You're well on the way, yeah. You know what, they're frightened. I can tell you right now, because this happened to us when we started to do the purchasing module. First of all, the school uses purchase orders, and it sounds like the town doesn't use it in the same format, meaning they might use purchase orders for some things, but otherwise they don't have a purchasing system. So the purchase order system can be a little bit tricky in just the way you set up the flow of it. Right, Kevin? I mean, it's, and it's the roles that you have to set up that go along with that get a little tricky.
But this is also where if you have some inclination towards centralization of services, then you can get beyond some of those challenges. So there's always opportunity to keep talking about those types of levers.
So when I said pros and cons, just to be clear, I was thinking, you know, the plan, I guess, was initially July 1. I think that's what I heard. And so, you know, another plan could be December 31st, right? And another plan could be July 1 of next year, because we're so far behind. So what are the pros and cons of each? If it's July 1 of this year, then we need to spend a lot of contractor services, I believe, in order for us to get there, right? That's right? That's kind of what I was getting at.
Okay, all right.
No, that's fine. I just because really we're in a time crunch. If we want July 1, that's gonna cost money. Whereas December 31st, okay, maybe we can do that just in the normal course of the resources that we have.
I think July is probably off the table.
Yeah, I would say that's a stretch. I would shoot for the December 31st. But
I've kind of lost track of what we purchased in terms of modules. Have we talked to Munis about possibly getting credits for some of the modules that we haven't implemented?
they did get a $50,000.
Yeah. We were able to get $50,000 back for the processing fee.
No, but not the module with the associated maintenance.
Every module has associated maintenance.
Right. So
that much I remember, yeah.
We're paying $200,000 a year. I'm not sure how that breaks down per module, but within that, they were able to go back this year and negotiate a $50,000 credit.
I think that probably came off the
pro services.
Yeah.
Again, not different circumstances, but we had an issue with a particular module that we got credit for in the maintenance. So it's always worth an ask. If we've got too many things to implement, we may have to, pick and choose what modules and what priority we want to put them in. And perhaps if we have a conversation with Munis around, look, we're going to defer these modules for several years. What options do we have? Because, we could get some relief back in the purchase, but the bigger relief is on the maintenance, the out year costs. No sense of paying for something for 4 years that you're not going to implement for 5.
Exactly. And the thing is I mean, because they have after they do this, they're going to do but they are pretty close to getting started on the HR side. I know that because I talked to, but they still have a billing module and they have a revenue module of some sort that they may never even, it might take 3 or 4 years to get there.
The goal is to get running, and maybe those other modules that we can live without at the moment, or continue on the existing software and just kind of work its way in. But the goal is to get it up and running. The modules, and losing my voice. Anyway. Okay, so we're not done yet. We have next week. School committee, watch that on Wednesday, please. We'll meet again on Thursday. And then on Monday, the following Monday, on the 15th, the Board of Selectmen will be meeting with the schools to go over basically the same presentation that we'll be getting, I think. All right. So if there are no other questions, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So
John
moved.
Dugas, motion to, Marianne's got it.
Okay. And I'd like a second.
Second, John Dugas.
Okay. All right. John Doherty is excused. All right, so John Dugas?
I second it, yeah.
Yes. Mary Ann?
Yes.
Michelle Kincaid?
Yes.
Andrew Levine?
Yes.
Lee Martinson?
Yes.
Bernie Nally?
Yep.
Kevin Stokes?
Yes.
And Teresa Manganelli. Okay, great. Meeting adjourned. Have a good weekend, everyone.
You too.
Thank you.
We'll see you next.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good shot.